Team names have long been a fixture of sports, and they serve a variety of purposes. They're meant to instill fear in an opponent, rouse pride in a fan base, inspire players to rally around a sense of identity, or to sell energy drinks. Sometimes a team nickname also reflects an artifact of local familiarity about the city, state, or region that the team calls home. For instance, if you've never been to the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina, you'd be shocked at the amount of literal blue devils that are roaming the streets there. I mean, it's a sea of blue satans as far as the eye can see. It's pretty horrifying. But there's no requirement that a team's nickname have any reflection in reality. In fact, sometimes the opposite is true. For instance, did a newspaper writer happen to describe your team as fighting as fiercely as tigers once in a newspaper column in the 1920s? Well, guess what? Your team is going to be called the Tigers from now on, even though the nearest native tiger population may be thousands of miles away. Sometimes team nicknames are just flat out geographically wrong, and I'm going to explore just how wrong they are, for the laughs. That's the spirit. Welcome to Third and Null, where geography and sports argue with one another about semantics. And look, 2020's here already, and it's just going to get worse, so we might as well get ourselves used to stupid debates, right? Now that the holiday season is over, the NBA regular season is in full swing. So why not celebrate with a 30-round game of How Wrong Is Your Name? It's really a simple exercise. We take every team in the NBA, determine where in the country or in the world their names are geographically valid, and then find out how far that team would have to move in order for their names to make sense. So let's go coast to coast with the association, starting with the West. Portland and the Trailblazers. Trails in the state of Oregon go together like educational games and Apple II computers. And back in the 90s, I died of dysentery enough times to know that the Oregon Trail began in Independence, Missouri. However, the act of blazing a trail doesn't occur only at the start of a trail. By definition, it happens at any point along the trail the first time that it is scouted by an explorer. And Portland's own reason for naming their team is due to the large amount of nature trails around Portland. So on a technicality, I'll award the Trailblazers with an error of 0. Remember, this is like golf. A lower score is better. Let's go down the coast to the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors were originally the Philadelphia Warriors before moving to California, and even that was a name borrowed from a previous team that had played in that city in the 1920s. Like I said, sometimes inspiring nicknames are just phrases that some sports writer pulled out of their, So here's where we have to deal with our first round of subjectivity. It's pretty clear that the original name was a fairly generic selection made to give a basketball team a sense of fighting spirit because the name Warriors is far too simple and broad that it could apply to absolutely anything. I could assign the distance between San Francisco and Philadelphia to be the Warriors' error, but that's literally the width of the United States. But let's focus on the name Warriors. A warrior is someone who fights wars, a warfighter, a military member. The nearest military installation to where the Warriors play is Travis Air Force Base, which is a distance of 40 miles. Not bad, considering. Next, the Kings. The Kings were originally the Rochester Royals when they were formed in New York in the 1950s, and as far as my research can tell, the name was simply a nice alliteration with the name of the city. They changed their name to the Kings after moving to Kansas City in order to avoid confusion with the already present Kansas City Royals baseball team, and they simply kept the name Kings after moving to California. At first slice, you might think that in order for the King's name to be valid, we would have to find the nearest nation to Sacramento ruled by a king, and that would be Spain. But remember, the object of this game is to find the minimum distance in order for the name to make sense. Spain, in fact, was the first European nation to settle the area of California, and many place names in the New World were named for Spanish monarchs during the Age of Exploration. We need look no further than Point Reyes, just north of San Francisco, for the solution. If you don't speak the niche, Reyes translated to English means kings, and that is a much more manageable error of 90 miles. I'm willing to allow technicalities for some of these. The Clippers are next, and a remarkably easy one to sort out. They got their name after relocating to San Diego due to the many tall sailing ships that berth in San Diego Bay. But San Diego isn't the only city that berths tall sailing vessels. Los Angeles has a maritime institute of its own, and it's only 21 miles away from where the Clippers play. Next, the Lakers. They were originally the Minneapolis Lakers due to Minnesota being the land of 10,000 lakes, and also Minnesota bordering the largest of the Great Lakes. Now, a Laker has two definitions, one being a freighter designed for sail on large inland lakes, such as the Great Lakes, the other being a lake trout, which is native to Canada, Alaska, the northeastern United States, and you could probably guess, the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, for that reason, I've got to send the Lakers all the way back to Minnesota to reclaim the validity of their name, and that's going to be a pretty large error of, 1,624 miles. Next is the Suns. So look, I'm willing to work with technicalities here, but I think with that policy I've kind of painted myself into a corner. The Suns were founded as an expansion franchise and got their name from a Name the Team contest sponsored by a local paper. And it's a good name, don't get me wrong. The Phoenix area is, after all, commonly called the Valley of the Sun, and Arizona in general receives the highest amount of total sunshine duration in the continental US. But the name they went with is the Suns, not the Valleys of the Sun, not the Sunshines, as entertaining as that might be. So there's only one place in, well, the solar system where that name could possibly hold up. And unfortunately, it's 93 million miles away. Real sorry, Phoenix. Next, the Jazz. So the Jazz were originally the New Orleans Jazz, which is a very appropriate name for a city with such a rich history of jazz music. In fact, New Orleans is considered to be the birthplace of jazz, as it originated within the African American communities in that city. But New Orleans isn't the only city with a strong connection to jazz music. Many American cities are famous for their jazz venues. Salt Lake City is not one of those places. Let me put it this way, I'm pretty white, and even I would feel out of place there. So the closest cities to Salt Lake City that have a strong jazz background are New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Kansas City. Winner in the distance contest is Los Angeles with a distance of 577 miles. Now for the Nuggets. They were originally called the Rockets, and no, they didn't eventually relocate to Houston. They were called that because the owner at the time also owned a long-haul trucking company called Rocket Lines. The name was changed to the Nuggets after being bought out by a new ownership group, which was more appropriate because gold mining has been an active industry in Colorado for over 150 years. And the closest gold mining vein, at least according to the USGS, is just west of Denver for an area of 10 miles. Not too bad. Next are the spurs. Now, spurs are devices worn by cowboys, cowgirls, or people who generically ride on horses, and sometimes they jingle and jangle.
How about you, Lash LaRue? Can you keep your spurs from jingling and jangling?
Many cities in the western United States hold large rodeos and stock shows annually, and San Antonio is no different, so the spurs get a 0. By the way, if you live in the Southwest and have never been to your local rodeo, you should really check it out. I mean, the Tucson, Arizona rodeo is a week-long affair, and it's such a big deal that the school district gets let out for that entire week. A whole week off from school for a rodeo. Now, the Dallas Mavericks are interesting. They also got their name from a Name the Team competition, and fans selected the Mavericks because of the 1950s TV Western Maverick starring James Garner. Top Gun hadn't been made yet, so the Tom Cruise Maverick connection doesn't have to be explored, thankfully. The basis for the connection between Maverick and the city of Dallas apparently was that the TV character was from Texas, but that's all the information I've got. I had to do some research to find out that one of the episodes of the series was set in a town of High Rock, Texas, which is 52 miles northeast of Dallas. Thanks to MaverickTrails.com for helping me identify the setting of one episode of a 1950s TV Western in order to make jokes about sports using maps. It was so worth the effort. The Houston Rockets were originally the San Diego Rockets, and when they moved to Houston in 1971, it was at the height of NASA's Apollo program, and keeping the name in Houston actually made sense, because it was the home of NASA's Mission Control. But rockets weren't getting launched from a pad in downtown Houston. I mean, think of the traffic. But we don't have to go all the way to Cape Canaveral to find the closest rocket launch site. In fact, we don't even have to leave Texas. SpaceX currently uses a launch facility in extreme southern Texas near Brownsville, which is 281 miles away. By the way, that's 2 pro basketball teams that the city of San Diego has lost. Weird. How about the Thunder next? Okay, having lived in Oklahoma myself, I can tell you firsthand that it thunders a lot in Oklahoma City. And if you don't believe me, then here's every tornado, severe hail, and severe wind report from the Storm Prediction Center since 1955. Somewhere in there is Oklahoma City. So there you go. Thunder, 0. Now for the Pelicans. This one's easy. Although pelican doesn't exactly have the same gravity that jazz has to the city of New Orleans, the brown pelican is the state bird of Louisiana. It's even on the state flag. Look at the cute little pelican chicks. Actually, New Orleans tried to get the Jazz name back from Utah when they were considering a name change, but Utah didn't want to give it up, which is too bad. But Pelican does provide a pretty good local flavor for the team. And when you think about it, they could have chosen the New Orleans King Cake Babies. So thank God they didn't do that. Minnesota Timberwolves. So, science warning. The Timberwolf is another name for the North American eastern wolf, or Canis lupus lycaon. The present geographic distribution of the eastern wolf is pretty much the northern United States and Great Lakes area, right through northern Minnesota, only 154 miles away from Minneapolis. By the way, the eastern wolf is listed as a threatened species, so if you're interested in conservation, you should check out nywolf.org or your local wildlife conservation department. Last of the Western Conference teams are the Grizzlies, formerly of Vancouver, now in Memphis. Here's the problem. This is where grizzly bears live according to the U.S. Fisheries and Wildlife Service. This is where Memphis is. Vancouver was probably a good home for the Grizzlies name. Not so much for Memphis, geographically speaking. The error in this situation is 1,195 miles. In the Eastern Conference, the Bucks are so named for the white-tailed deer population in Wisconsin, which is also the state animal. And those dang things are everywhere. I mean, look, there are probably more deer in America than Americans. In fact, if you're leaving a Bucks game in downtown Milwaukee, you probably stand a greater chance of getting hit by a wandering deer than by a car. Can't find any flaws in this name, so your error is 0. The Bulls were so named for the Chicago stockyards and the meatpacking industry that put Chicago on the map. Many of the animals destined for Chicago's slaughterhouses were cattle, and many of those cattle were, well, bulls. The old Union stockyards are 5 miles away from the Bulls Arena, so there's nothing at all wrong with that name, unless you're anti-animal cruelty. The Indiana Pacers. I'll be honest, I did not know what a pacer was before starting this or what pacer might mean, but apparently it refers to a type of horse racing where the horse pulls a cart behind it and it's only allowed to walk at a very specific pace, and it can't go any faster than that pace or else it gets penalized. So it's kind of like a race walking, but for horses, I guess. I do not wish to go further down this rabbit hole, but fortunately there is a second possible origin for the name Pacer, which is a reference to the pace car used in the Indianapolis 500, which is in Indianapolis. Well, really it's in Speedway, Indiana, which is about 4 miles away from where the Pacers play. Because I have no intention of mapping every horse cart racing venue in America, I'm going with the pace car thing. The Pistons originally played in Fort Wayne, Indiana, owned by a man who also owned a factory that literally made pistons for car, truck, and train engines. But when the team moved to Detroit, the home of America's automotive industry, the name still made sense, so why change? Cars had pistons in their engines after all. Cars were getting manufactured in Detroit at the time. They still are, even now, just less so. The nearest plant being the Ford River Rouge complex, which is about 6 miles away. The Cavaliers were named via a Name the Team contest that passed up on other options like the Jays, the Foresters, and the Presidents. As far as I can tell, it falls into the cool sounding name that also happens to be an alliteration with the name of the city category. So a Cavalier was a term used to describe one of the two factions of the English Civil War in the 17th century, which was in England. And England is a ways away, 3,535 miles away. But we'd also need to go back in time by about 350 years before the name becomes relevant again. But since I don't have a TARDIS or a DeLorean, I can't translate time into distance. So the error is 3,535, I've decided, subjectively. Next, the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks were originally the Tri-Cities Blackhawks in Moline, Illinois, borrowing the name of a Native American chief of the Sauk Nation who lived in that area during the 1800s. They shortened the name to the Hawks after moving to Milwaukee and then to Atlanta. The thing is, the Hawks mascot is a literal hawk, and those are one of the most abundant birds of prey in the United States. For example, the red-tailed hawk, which appears to be the basis for the Atlanta Hawks, is basically everywhere. I mean, look, they're so abundant that one of Harry the Hawk's cousins might leave an unwanted package on the roof of your car if you park outside the Hawks arena during a game. To me, that's an error of 0. So magic is more of a concept than a tangible thing, and also it's imaginary, which complicates the distance equation just a tad. But Disney World's Magic Kingdom is a real place, and Princess Anna lives there. You know, Anna from Frozen. She's real. And best of all, the Magic Kingdom is only a manageable 16 miles away from the Magic's arena, which is More of the point of this video than Disney princesses, I guess. The Miami Heat. Now, you might think that heat is more of a concept kind of like magic, but heat is actually a real measurable quantity of the atmosphere. But heat is also a pretty relative term. To me, 70 degrees Fahrenheit is a very nice, pleasant spring day. To someone from North Dakota, 70 degrees is a balmy heat wave. To someone from Phoenix, 70 degrees is a cold snap. So, where is heat? Well, even though Miami is in a climate with the highest annual average temperature in the US, that doesn't mean it's going to feel hot to every person there. So to resolve that, we have to take the heat to a place where literally everybody on Earth is going to agree that
pretty much everywhere it's gonna be hot. Try that?
Then I don't need a jacket.
So welcome to the Eastern Basin region of Mauritania in the Western Sahara Desert, where the average annual temperature is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not the average high, that's the average temperature, full stop, as in year round. That's hotter than Death Valley.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
And it's 4,650 miles away. The Charlotte Hornets were christened using a name the team competition, but with a good amount of local flavor involved. The city of Charlotte was a hotbed of anti-British sentiment during the American Revolution, and patriots occupied the city during the war. So great was the support for the revolution in the city that General Cornwallis of the British Army called it a hornet's nest of rebellion as he retreated from it. But there is a lack of evidence that Cornwallis actually said this himself. The quote was only attributed to him decades after the war ended. Even if Cornwallis did not actually say this about Charlotte, a species of the insect called the European hornet is still plentiful on the American East Coast, and it can be found in Charlotte, possibly even in the rafters of the arena, or in your house right now. We've already talked about magic, so it's time to talk about wizards. Now, wizards are not real because magic is not real, and because magic is not real, that means Disney princesses are not real. They're just characters voiced by actresses. So where do we take the wizards in order to make their name meaningful? Well, this is a topic that nobody likes to talk about, but apparently there used to be a title called the Imperial Grand Wizard within the Ku Klux Klan, but as far as my research could tell, that title doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's all we need to talk about that subject, because frankly, it doesn't deserve to occupy any more space in my brain than that. So let's just move on. Before Harry Potter, the most well-known wizard in the world was probably Merlin of King Arthur lore, who was a hodgepodge of several legendary figures. Merlin, according to the tales, was born in the Welsh town of Carmarthen, which is 3,497 miles away. But still, Merlin, in all likelihood, was not a real person. Today, Harry Potter is arguably the most famous wizard on the planet, and according to the books, the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is somewhere in northeast Scotland, which is even further away. But that still doesn't take away the fact that Hogwarts is a fictitious place. However, the wizarding world of Harry Potter is a real place in Orlando at Universal Studios. And if it worked for the Orlando Magic, it can work for the Wizards as well, and that's only 762 miles away. The 76ers are so named for the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the city of Philadelphia in 1776. Thanks to Nicolas Cage, the Declaration of Independence remains safely preserved in the National Archives in Washington, D.C., 121 miles away. Thanks, Nick. But the Declaration was actually signed in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, which is merely 3 miles away. This is another fact that most of us know thanks to Nicolas Cage. Thank you again, Nick. Speaking of Nick, the New York Knicks name is a reduction of the word Knickerbocker, which is a dated term for a person from the city of New York, specifically someone from Manhattan Island. Now, the word Knickerbocker actually comes from a story written by famous early American author Washington Irving, where the main character was a Dutch historian named Diedrich Knickerbocker, composing a history of the Dutch colonization of present-day New York City, and the word sort of evolved from there to represent sort of the late Dutch that later came to be known as Knickerbockers, and some of their odd mannerisms. Sorry about that. The Knicks play in Manhattan, so their error is 0. The Nets are just across the East River in Brooklyn and got their name both because it rhymes with 2 other New York pro sports franchises, the Mets and the Jets, and also because the game of basketball involves a net. For that reason, regardless of where the Brooklyn Nets play games, they are never more than 50 feet away from a literal net at any given time, so that's pretty good. The Toronto Raptors were founded in 1995 and followed the method of many other franchises by employing a name the team contest to leave the question of what the team is going to be called open to the fans. Only in Toronto's case, the contest was open to the entire nation of Canada, and we've seen what can happen when naming contests don't go quite the way the organizers planned. So why did the entire nation of Canada settle on the name Raptors? Well, the naming contest was going on in 1994, and in 1993 the hit film Jurassic Park had been released. The movie was still very much on the minds of everybody even a year later, so with the popularity of the movie, Canadians chose Raptors for the name of their new basketball team. But there still might be hope for Toronto. Maybe there have been some velociraptor fossils discovered somewhere in Canada that might validate the team name. No. It turns out every fossil of the genus Velociraptor has been discovered in either Central Asia, China, or Mongolia. The nearest fossil discovery to Toronto is in Uzbekistan, only 6,335 miles away. But at least you won the championship, right? And before we go arguing about semantics, about the fact that raptor is also a term for a bird of prey like a hawk or a falcon, just stop. This is clearly a person in a velociraptor costume, and that is not a bird of prey dribbling a basketball in the Toronto Raptors' original jerseys. It's a dang dinosaur. You can see its claws poking through the toes of its Air Force Ones. Finally, the Boston Celtics, who owe their name to team founder Walter Brown. He was inspired by a barnstorming basketball team from New York called the Original Celtics, and in Brown's own words, Boston is full of Irishmen. And he's somewhat correct. According to the American Community Survey, Boston does own the highest percentage of Irish ancestry of any major U.S. city with 14% as of 2017. But that's not a majority. It's a lot of Irish heritage, sure, but could there be more somewhere else? Yes, in fact, in the town of Scituate, Massachusetts, 19 miles away, which has been called the most Irish town in America. Again, according to the American Community Survey, of the 5,700 or so residents, over 42% of them claim Irish ancestry. There you have it, every NBA team ranked from most wrong to most correct. But don't worry whether or not your team name is right at home or belongs on another continent or on the surface of the actual sun. Fly your colors high, wear your team pride on your sleeve, and enjoy the rest of the NBA regular season. Or until your team starts tanking for draft picks. Thanks for watching. I just wanted to say hey.
Hey.
And thank you for watching and liking my previous video. This is my second one, so I hope you like it as well. If you'd like to know more, give me feedback, or request a specific topic, or just say hey.
Hey.
Then leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget you can subscribe to my channel if you just can't get enough of sports and mapping, or if you just want a good laugh. Bye.